let me just continue. Yeah, I'd like to talk about recent auction results in Europe. As you probably heard, they've made the news, so there's a lot of focus recently on low bids in renewable energy auctions. I mean, that's of course the case internationally, but now also in Europe. So the zero bids for offshore wind this year and also other technologies. This presentation will take a closer look at what's behind those results. A word of caution in the beginning, because there's a lot of comparison of prices on auction outcomes in the news and also in the public. But by not looking what's actually behind those results, there's a risk of comparing apples to oranges. So this is why I will try to give you some background on how to interpret those prices. I also have to make the caveat that to really assess whether an auction has been successful and effective, you have to look at the realization rates. So did the projects actually get implemented that have been auctioned? For Europe, we don't have information on all auctions on the implementation rates because it's still too early for that. So we have it for some, but not for all countries and all auctions. That's why in this presentation I will focus particularly on the price results, but keep in mind that the realization rates would be needed for a complete picture. Now, first looking into solar PV, here I picked the cases of France, Germany and the Netherlands. Overall, you can see that auction results have decreased quite substantially. And in fact, here these are this is the results in France for rooftop. Those ones were for ground-mounted and large roofs. The green ones for Germany, and the orange ones are for the Netherlands. Yeah, here again you see just the excerpt for France and Germany. You see that the price decline has been in the order of 50%, so between 46 and 53%. What are the reasons for these price reductions? I think it's important to understand, of course, technology cost reductions are also driving price reductions. So without those cost reductions, the price reduction wouldn't have been possible. But there's also the competitive pressure of the auctions that has forced bidders to reduce their margins and actually also realize those cost reduction in terms of price reductions. You can also see that in the French rooftop auction there were some problems in the early phase. So if you look at these high results at the beginning in the year 2012, this was also due to some problems in auction design, which led to disqualification of a number of bidders and relatively high prices. And those problems have been solved in later years. What you can also see is that for Germany, there has been, well, a continuous decrease in prices. So again, those are the ones in green. But in the last year, in 2017, there have also been increasingly ground-mounted system on agricultural land entering the auction, which were not allowed generally, but which are now allowed in some parts of Germany, and which again have like driven price decreases, as though those have lower cost than solar installations on other sites. Interesting one are the Dutch results, because they are some way against the general trends of decreasing cost. So if you look at this orange line, it actually starts at a very low point in 2012, then goes up to 14 cents in 2014, and then down again, up again. What are the reasons for that? It's actually interesting because the PV realized here was part of a technology neutral auction scheme. So the Dutch SDE Plus, that's the main support scheme, doesn't provide for technology specific auction volumes, but basically allows cheapest technologies to come first, and then once the budget is used up, the auction stops. So there are years, and that was especially the case in the beginning in 2013, when almost no PV entered the auction because it was more expensive than other cheap technologies. Only very few bidders who would actually submit bids below their cost managed to secure support. So in 2012, 6.9 cents per kilowatt hour was really very low for PV. I think it was the roof of a large warehouse where they probably didn't calculate the full price, but were rather interested also in the image of having the PV size, the PV plant. Later on, the Dutch government increased the budget for renewable support, and with that also the competitive pressure decreased. So in the year 2014, for example, a lot of PV entered the auction or was successful in the auction. And this was also the case because there were only few wind sites who were ready to enter the auction at that time, and so then PV could actually enter at the maximum, close to the maximum price allowed for PV, which was 15 cents. Similarly, also this year, you could see that in 2017. There have been less cheap options available, and that allowed PV to enter at a relatively high price. So what you see in the Netherlands is the strong influence of the competition level on prices, and if competition is not so strong for technology, then technologies can actually bid close to their ceiling price. We'll show that again later for wind energy. Yeah, now going to onshore wind results. Here I will look at the cases of Italy, Germany, and the Netherlands. Well, first of all, these are the results of the three countries by auction date. So between 2012 and end of 2017. You can see that Netherlands are considerably higher than the other countries, and yes, maybe Germany seems surprisingly low in comparison to the other results. The picture changes somewhat if you look at the realization deadline. So still, there's significant price differences, But you can actually see that the low German results are also linked to a later realization time. So it's actually the case that the project developers who bid those prices could calculate or act with new turbine generations which will then also come at lower cost than the earlier years. Going a bit into the details of those countries. Well, first of all, it's also important to understand that the support period per country is different, which again makes comparing those prices somewhat comparing apples to oranges. Here we made an example where we actually calculated the net present value of future support payments to make them more comparable. So again, this is how it looked in the not normalized system, and this is if you compare the net present value. So the differences between Netherlands and the other two countries become smaller because the Netherlands also only supports installations for 15 years, while Italy and Germany provide 20 years of support. Still, you can see that the price range for the Netherlands is higher. Again, looking at what are the reasons behind those higher prices, it can be explained by the technology neutral auction. So similar like in the case of PV, you will see that there's different competition levels over different years in the Netherlands. So if you see in the year 2012, the wind was actually facing high competition by other renewable sources. It was renewable heat, geothermal, and biomass heat who could compete. And only cheapest bids would be awarded support. Later on, when the support budget and thus the auction volume was increased, wind was already among the options that with quite high certainty would receive support. So they actually could bid very close to their ceiling price. So in the Netherlands, there's specific ceiling prices for each technology category. So so they could bid very close to the ceiling price for wind onshore. And eventually, this ceiling price was then also decreased by the Dutch government, but still, wind onshore would always stay close to this to the ceiling prices. So you can say that the price development for onshore wind in the Netherlands is largely determined by the ceiling prices set by the Dutch government. And that's quite different from other countries. And it's an interesting case because in Europe there's a big debate on whether renewable support should be technology neutral or technology specific. And guidelines by the European Commission favor technology neutral support. But what you can see here is that at least for cases where technologies are among the lower cost options, technology neutral options actually can also increase the prices. So it really depends on what you look at. look at, but in the end, a core element for reaching low prices in auctions is the competition level. And here you see that there has been limited competition for wind onshore in the Dutch auction. Now we're looking at the German prices. Again, as I already said, they have a long realization deadline, so projects only need to be realized in 2022, 2023, which partly explains why they could bid so low. But there's also some peculiarities of the German scheme. In fact, the German government introduced preferential routes for community energy projects. This has to be seen against the background that community energy has a high value in the German energy system, and that there's a lot of community energy actors active. And the idea was that these actors should still have a chance to be successful in the auction. What happened then was that preferential rules for these projects were introduced. So they have relatively low qualification requirements. They don't need to show a permit like other wind projects. They need to provide a lower bid bond, and they have this longer realization period of 54 months, while other projects have to be completed after 30 months. And then again, also combined with a lower penalty. The combination of these factors then led to the situation that nearly all projects who won the auctions were so-called community energy projects, because they could they could bid at lower prices because they have this longer realization period where they can already take into account future wind turbine generations. And there's also, due to those lower qualification requirements and penalties, there's a higher risk that those projects will not be realized. So this is the downside of this design. There was also a big debate, well, who were the winners of those auctions? Are these really community energy projects? Because you could see that it was mostly professional project developers who some way then managed to found their local energy communities. So there was kind of a political discussion whether this is correct or whether those are not fake energy communities, which is a bit hard to say because, I mean, legally they met the requirements of the auction. But overall, this whole situation led to quite strong distortion in the market, that only few market players won at relatively low prices, and again kind of speculating on lower prices in the future. Against this background, Germany decided to pause these special rules for community energy projects in 2018. Now it's under discussion what will come afterwards, but most likely it will be the system will be changed in a way that all projects will have to show that they already have a permit for their wind sites. So overall, what you can learn from this is, well, pre-qualification requirements and realization deadlines play a very crucial role, for the price level you will see, but also for the realization probability you can expect. And it also shows that it's not easy to properly deal with community energy projects in an auction, because in a way it was very a positive move that there was a political support to support community energy, but in practical terms this didn't really work out the way it was envisaged. There's now a lot of discussion on what could still be done for community energy. So this was some results for onshore wind. As a last point, I'd like to go to the offshore wind auctions, because those have also been very big in the news. Here you can see the results in Denmark, UK, Netherlands, and Germany. So Denmark is actually also an interesting case, because they started really early on to hold offshore wind auctions. They started at low price levels, which then increased in the Onshore tender, which was back in 2010, but realization deadline is 2013. One reason for this price increase was that there was more favorable conditions at the same time in the UK. So actually the higher price levels in UK then also influenced the price level in Denmark. Other reasons were the high risk related to high penalty and relatively short realization deadline. But since then prices have decreased, and that's the case for Denmark, but also for other countries. So you see all countries price developments point downwards, which is of course related to the massive cost reductions in offshore wind development and the technological progress, but also related to the increasing competition level. An interesting one is, of course, the German results, which for two projects actually provided zero. There it's quite important to understand that this is not zero price, but zero support. So in generally what those figures show is a contract for difference or sliding premium. But this at some point this can kind of change to a new system. But I will explain that in a moment. So what actually led to the high competition in the German auction and like resulting then in zero bids or zero support bids? An important factor was that it was the only way to actually secure market share and get access to the electricity grid and the market. So in Germany there have been a lot of offshore sites under development, and it's clear that only those who win the auction in 2017 or 2018 will still receive grid access. The other side have to be given back to the government, and then the government might develop them in the future or not. But basically, project developers will have to give them up. So it's really these two options are the only way to get eligible for grid connection and access to the electricity market. Also, there is kind of an opt-out option of the auction. So overall, it has a significant penalty of 100 euros per kilowatt. But bidders who give back their award before financial close only pay 30 euros per kilowatt, which is not very high. So in that sense, bidders can actually, at a relatively low cost, decide to opt out of the system and not realize the project. And they only have to take this decision in the early 2020s. Maybe quickly going back at this, I mean, it's still remarkable that there's such a difference between the result in UK and in Germany. And I would also explain some other factors behind that. A very important one is actually the type of support scheme. So, which explains why zero bid in Germany are really not the same as would be a zero bid in the UK. The UK support scheme is a contract for difference. So bidders actually receive exactly the price they bid. So let's say a project bids 6 cents per kilowatt hour, then it will always get the difference between the electricity market price and this strike price is it bid. But once the electricity price actually rises above 6 cents, theoretically, then the project would actually have to pay back. So this difference would have to be paid back to the government. So it's really that it's one fixed rate over the full support period, and it's not a fixed feed-in tariff like in countries outside of Europe or like in the past in Europe, but it's a contract for difference that always pays a difference between the market price and this bid price. In Germany, it's also kind of a contract for difference, but not a symmetric one. But what's called a sliding premium here is that yes, the bidder bids a fixed price. So let's say 3 cents. But if then the electricity market price increases above 3 cents, the bidder can keep the difference. So in that case, the bidder wouldn't actually receive a support payment, but it would still receive the higher market revenue. So what you could say is that in this system, the bidder only pays for floor price, for a minimum price, and not for the absolute price it needs. Now, if you think about the 0-cent bid that we saw in the German auctions. What they said is actually, I fully rely on the electricity market revenues, and I bid in for 0, so I don't need support. But I'm not saying that I will realize the project at 0 cent. And this explains why the results in under the symmetric CFD in the UK and this asymmetric CFD in Germany will always look very, very different, because you would never see 0 cent bids in the UK system. So this is really one of the important factors between the differences you see in the prices is the structure of the support payment. There's also other relevant differences. So the cost for development and grid connection have to be borne by the project developer in the UK, while in Germany grid connection is paid by the TSO, by the grid operator. And so there is an estimate by UK source that this amounts to approximately 11 British pounds per megawatt hour. So a little more than a cent difference that you can attribute to who actually pays for grid connection and pre-development of sites. Another important factor, of course, the commissioning dates. That's what you saw earlier, is that some offshore wind plants actually have to be built in the coming years, while the German offshore wind farms only have to be built 24, 25. So the offshore auction this year, I mean, they both took place in 2017, but in UK it was for the commissioning date 2022, 2023, while in Germany it was for the years 24, 25. It's not a big difference, but it's a difference. And finally, also there's a different funding period, 15 years in UK and 20 years in Germany. So overall, this means that the UK results look much higher than the German results. But if you look at the factors behind it, they might not be that different. Here, finally, a slide where you can see that the allocation of responsibilities for site development and grid connection is actually, differs quite substantially between countries. So you can see that, for example, the Netherlands actually take up a large share of the pre-development. So it's the zone identification, site selection, site investigation, even the permitting. All of that is basically done by a public agency, and only the construction of the wind farm then has to be done by the project developer. In Germany, it's a mix depending on what system you look at, but more steps are taken by the project developer, and the UK is probably the system which assigns most responsibilities to the project developer. Now, coming to lessons learned from the European experience. Well, you can see that the competition in the auctions contributed to decreasing prices for all technologies. Especially in the case of the offshore auction, an important factor was the securing of market access, which further incentivized aggressive bidding. In some cases, there are questions about whether those projects will be viable and will actually be built. So I think this remains to be seen. Those cases we've analyzed where realization rates were already available in Europe were quite encouraging. So, for example, the PV auction in Germany the first ones had a realization rate of nearly 100%. But especially those cases I identified which had some challenges. So those low onshore wind prices in the German auction, or the zero bid for offshore, there are at least question marks. Because those bids really built on the assumption that electricity market prices will rise in the future. And I mean, there's also good reasons to believe that they will rise, but it's still, this is risky. So it might be that bidders have been too optimistic and will still withdraw at a later stage. This could have been prevented by auction design by setting stricter penalties. But this is the situation, yeah, that we're in now. So yeah, overall we see decreasing prices, but question marks in some cases on realization. We see some cases where prices have not been low, but rather increasing, and that was usually the case when there was limited competition. And in particular, this was the case for low-cost options and technology-neutral auctions that didn't really face much competition. So in that cases, they could really go up to the expected clearing price or to their specific ceiling price without having to yeah, bid as low as possible. And I think this yeah, sheds a new light on the discussion on technology neutral support in Europe, because, well, it is true that there can be technology neutral options can lead to a lot of competition, but it's also true that especially for the lower cost options, they can also reduce the competition level. Overall, we've seen that it's quite important to consider the differences in support framework. So, for example, the type of market premium that is paid, and whether project developers have to bear the grid connection cost. And of course, there's also other factors. So, for example, what sites are available in a country that will strongly influence the auction outcome. Which maybe finally leads me to one point that was also raised by somebody was discussing with from South Africa. They asked, well, why is it actually that prices in Europe tend to be higher than in many developing countries? And I think this is a very good question, and again also linked to specific context factors. So that in Europe you have a liberalized electricity market where you have to yeah, sell your electricity in that market and gain market revenue, which is more risky than getting paid a fixed rate for yeah, for a longer period. And I think what we also see in developing countries that often international finance institutions are involved in one or the other way, which again mitigates the risk. So again, risk is also a very important factor for explaining the auction outcome. So then I will leave it at this and would be happy to answer your question.